warm welcome to each and every one of you to this very interesting, roundtable panel on the future of higher education. Dear friends, the higher education sector, has been growing visibly over the past couple of years. And lo and behold, 2020, there was an unprecedented onset of the pandemic, and suddenly everything was gone for a whack. The entire higher education sector has, been totally disrupted. Schools were forced to shut down, students were forced to go back, and there has been a pendulum swing, right from being used to teaching students face to face to a total swing on the other side to embracing online teaching over the past 10 months, I must say. And it's been 10 months to a year now, and the problem continues to persist. Education institutes in different countries have their own unique problems as well, right? For example, in India, the digital divide continues, to widen. There are millions of students all over the world who can't even afford a digital device. Some students who can afford a digital device do not have the infrastructure required to support. So there continues to be challenges, and heads of higher education institutes are right now, still scratching their heads, when they are on a drawing board. What do we do? What are the trends do we foresee? What will 2021, 2022 and beyond look like? So friends, we have three very eminent dear friends and also scholars, academicians who have joined us today. I would like to introduce all of them. So we have Professor Andrew Shannon. He is the Provost and Dean and Professor of History at Wellesley College. Andrew has taught a range of courses in modern European history with a particular emphasis on the 20th century, the history of modern France and World War II. He was a founding director of Wellesley's International Relations Program and the first director of the college's summer school. In 1981, he was awarded the college's Pinansky Prize for Excellence in Teaching. He was a member of the last two presidential search committees, and in the summer of 2007, served briefly as the acting president of the college. Professor Andrew, it's a pleasure to have you on board. Thanks for making out time. Welcome to this panel.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to join you.
The second panelist is Professor Catherine Epstein. She's the Provost and Dean of the faculty and Winkley Professor of History at Amherst College. Catherine has taught a wide range of European history classes, including courses on the Holocaust, Nazi Germany, and World War II. She is currently general editor of the Wiley-Blackwell textbook series, Short Histories. In addition, she is an elected member of the Council of the American Historical Association. Since July 2014, Professor Catherine has been the Dean of the faculty at Amherst College. Kathy, it's been a pleasure to have you on board. Thanks for taking out time. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Next, we have Professor Deepak Jain. Professor Deepak is the former Dean of Kellogg School of Management, the former Dean of INSEAD, and currently the co-president and global advisor for CEIBS. Deepak's influential career spans nearly 4 decades as an educator, a senior business school administrator, and a consultant to corporates and governments. He is an accomplished researcher and faculty and has earned the prestigious John D.C. Little Best Paper Award. In recognition to his many scholarly achievements and outstanding teaching, he also was named the Sandy and Morton Goldman Professor of Entrepreneurial Studies and Professor of Marketing at Kellogg. Deepak, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to a very interactive discussion.
Thank you.
All right. So, this is, definitely a discussion where we are going to look at the past and we're going to envision the future. And, we are going to provide our perspective on what the future entails for undergrad and postgrad education. So I'm going to ask my first question to Andy. So Andy, what has been your biggest challenge during the pandemic? And what did the Institute do to overcome those challenges?
Well, thanks again for inviting me to participate in this panel. It's great to participate with friends from Flame and from other institutions that we really value participation, collaboration with. I mean, the biggest challenge, I would say the whole challenge. I think back to 10 months ago and how quickly we had to transition from what felt like just normal times to completely abnormal times. We had to close down our campus. We had, like everybody else, to send students home. And we were halfway through the semester. And I would say on that first day, we did not have a clear sense of how we were going to be able to complete the semester that we had started. We have a faculty that is wonderful teaching faculty, but they, for the most part, had never taught remotely. There were a few who'd had that experience, but most of our faculty had never taught students remotely. And they had 2 weeks to figure out how they were going to do it. And we had 2 weeks to figure out how we were going to make it possible. Dishan, you mentioned the challenges in India in the inequitable access to digital equipment and support infrastructure. And we had those problems too. We had students who were going all over the world, and we had to figure out how we could ensure that they had access to the education that Wellesley provides for the rest of the year. I often think back to those first few hours and days and think if I had known how complicated this was going to be, how many layers of challenge there were going to be, I'm not sure whether I wouldn't have thrown in the towel on the first day. But I think it was just a step-by-step for the whole institution, every single member of it, not just the leadership of it, every single faculty member, every single staff member, every single student had to figure out a way through the maze, which is really what it felt like. Here we are 10 months later, and I feel we have shown an adaptability that honestly, I'm not sure I would have expected at the outset.
Catherine, were the challenges similar or did Amherst face other challenges?
So I would say our challenges were very similar to the challenges that Wellesley faced. And along with Andy, it's just been amazing to see the sort of the dedication of faculty, students, and staff to make all of this work. I think that what the pandemic has shown is how flexible institutions like ours can be. Now, generally, they're not very flexible, and generally they tend to stay sort of along the trodden path. But what's been remarkable about this situation is how flexible institutions have proven to be, how willing faculty, staff, and students have been to step up to the challenges. I would say beyond all the challenges that Andy mentioned, the technical challenges, the health and safety challenges, I think one of the things that we found most challenging is how to build community and how important it is to have community. So much of our faculty, initially in March, all they were trying to figure out is, how do I get my classes online? How do I teach? And what we heard back from students was, this wasn't so great. We didn't feel connected. We felt really disconnected from the faculty, from the institution, from other students. And so what we started to really focus a great deal on was, how do you build community in a remote environment? And I think that has proven to be a real focus of our endeavors. And it's what has, I think, permitted us to teach fairly effectively in the fall and presumably now on into the spring, since we're still about half and half remote and in person in the spring. So that building community piece and building community also among faculty and staff, I think that is a real challenge. I would also say, and maybe we'll get to this, that the kinds of values that liberal arts education inculcates in individuals is precisely what we're seeing in the unfolding pandemic. So we're seeing flexibility, we're seeing critical thinking, we're seeing the need to look at problems from a variety of different viewpoints. All these things I imagine we're going to talk about a little bit further in this conversation. So I'll stop now, but the challenges have been great, and the way that individuals and the institution has set up has been, I think, quite remarkable. And Amherst is not alone. I think this is true of many institutions.
Absolutely, absolutely. Deepak, were the challenges different for business schools and higher education, executive education especially?
Yes, so first, executive education is very different than when it comes to degree education. So in graduate schools, I would say that this challenge made one thing very clear. Many professors who were not very comfortable teaching online learned this skill. And I tell you, their overall teaching ratings were better online than in person. At least I can tell you of the people that I interacted with. Now, see, what is the difference between online and the others? If you know the students and you have been teaching them, then you can still teach online, have the discussions to some level, and graduate students are used to more technology and others. And that's why many schools last year were able to complete their graduation ceremonies by June and let the students complete their graduate degree. When it came to executive education, the scene was completely different, because executives come to be with each other in the classroom. And it's not only the content, but also the network that you create. In graduate schools, what happened, at least at Northwestern University, I would say, students were still in their dorms. They were there. Classrooms, they could not go. But in executive education, a lot of programs were cancelled, because the company said that the whole purpose is that you do group work and others. Slowly it started, but I personally feel that this challenge that we saw through COVID on executive education would be more severe than on the regular one. But then on the regular education, the other challenge comes is about placement. And what we found was that even the placement was not badly affected. Students who came for an MBA degree, they got the jobs through online interviews or the online process. So overall, this was not what students were expecting, but given the current environment, they were happy that the time was not wasted and they were able to graduate and learn. The professors were more generous with their time, so students who wanted to pursue or with questions after the class, they were also able to get a lot out of it. But what it required on behalf of the students were self-discipline and self-motivation. People who wanted to know more had access. And my son is doing his PhD at University of Chicago, and he was the TA to a professor on financial statement analysis. And he said that he was more busy when the classes were online, because a lot of students would send questions to him. But he felt students still had enough interest and intellectual curiosity that he handled through the online part as opposed to the professors answering in the classroom. So I think we all learned something new, how to teach online. At least I am technologically from the Stone Age, but still I was able to give a few lectures. And that's why I asked your assistant to help me with the PowerPoint presentation, because normally I teach my classes with Blackboard and chalk. I have never used slides or presentations in 40 years of my teaching, but this COVID gave me one skill.
Deepak, we all evolve, and adversity, makes us learn new skills, as they say. But
Yes.
Deepak, you talked about placements, and that got me to think about the purpose of education. This is a purpose summit, and we've got people talking about their purpose in life, sharing their life stories. But whenever I am attending a roadshow, whenever I accompany my team for our outreach programs, right? So whether, at least I can share my India experience with all of you and probably take your cues. Generally, right, there is this return on investment calculation that parents and students usually have. And, we talk about, say, for example, when I'm talking about liberal education and the benefits of liberal education, generally after, the 40-minute talk gets over, parents come to me, and the only question they have for me is, can you share placement statistics? Right? I just feel like, pulling my hair out and say, what, this is a tunnel vision question. But that's the mindset, and henceforth, this entire interest in liberal education has been a recent phenomena in India, right? Traditionally, students have been, quote unquote, encouraged to pursue the traditional engineering, medicine, law, and those, streams that would have a direct relevance to, jobs. Similarly, in the MBA space, you pick your school that gives better placement records. So, so the purpose of education, in my opinion, is more than just getting students ready for jobs and careers. It's about getting them ready for life. So I'm going to ask this question to Andy now, right? Do you face similar problems, and what advice do you have to parents and students who are pursuing liberal arts education?
It's a big question, Dishan. We do have those questions from parents and families, of course. Maybe begin, though, to begin with, I'll connect it to the situation of the pandemic and the challenges that we are facing right now. Because in a way, what the pandemic has challenged us with is how to adapt the very essence of the kind of education that we value to a situation where it's fundamentally more difficult than in normal times. I mean, the essence of a liberal arts college education like the one that Catherine's college or my college provides, it's in the face-to-face encounter between students and faculty. As Catherine said, it's in the community that exists on the campus among students. And community can also be thought of as network. It's the community in the classroom of learners working together. All those things that are so essential to what liberal arts education stands for have been made infinitely more difficult by the pandemic. And we have had to work really, really hard to replicate those qualities in this abnormal situation. We have worked, I think Catherine's absolutely right, had to work really hard to give students who are studying remotely somewhat similar sense of community with the other students in the class, with the faculty members teaching them, with their friends spread now around the world, rather than just on the same 100-acre campus or 50, however big the campus. So, there's no doubt that this is a great challenge for us. I think that if this pandemic situation were to be our permanent future, then I think we would face really tough questions from those parents and families that you're talking about. Because the answer that we give to parents who ask those questions is that it really is an education for a lifetime, not for the first job. That it is about developing the habits of mind and the ways of thinking about the world and thinking about oneself, one's responsibilities, one's roles, that prepare someone to live a purposeful life after college. All those things can be done in a fully remote realm, but I think that it would be arguing against ourselves as liberal arts college faculty and deans if we suggested that they could be done as well in a remote environment as they could be in a campus environment. So we are in a bit of a holding pattern while this pandemic is going on. And we have had to work very hard to ensure that our current students have every aspect of the experience that we can give them of the regular Wellesley experience. But I would be lying if I said I weren't really looking forward to the day when we can have students back. And I think those arguments about what liberal education provides will be much easier to articulate compellingly.
No, absolutely. We at Flame, we are also just waiting to, resume normalcy because it's a challenge. Because, the purpose of education is to prepare students for future. And as much as in-class experience is important, in my opinion, 50% of a student's sculpting and learning happens outside class. So that's my next question to Catherine, seeking that fine balance between in-class. I mean, assuming that things do not resume to normalcy, what are you doing in your institution to ensure that your students' experience is, and their teaching experience is not impacted as much?
So great question. So we are hopeful, in fact, that things will get a little bit back more back to normal by next fall, although we recognize probably not everyone will be able to be back on campus. And so we may still have some students studying remotely. So, I think that what's important here is that we recognize that, the residential education that we give really is superior to a remote education. And not everyone would agree with that. I mean, I think some people think it's just the courses, but I think what we've learned in this pandemic is that it's not just the courses. The academic, the formal academic curriculum remains the heart of the college, but at the same time, it doesn't work in isolation. A liberal arts education does involve interactions with students and faculty among themselves outside of the formal classroom. And so I think that what we need to do is to get back to that more normal residential situation. In the meantime, one can come up with strategies around building connections and building community and figuring out all sorts of pedagogical techniques that help to foster those relationships. But in the end, those are all sort of stand-in. They're stand-ins for when, in fact, we can get back to residential education. I think that one of the things that I really want to focus on is that the pandemic has brought to light how important liberal arts education is. I mean, the sorts of things that we educate students for, namely a changing world or facing challenges, all those important things, they have all shown, the pandemic has shown and highlighted all the ways that it's important that people are much more flexible, that they focus on relationships. I mean, I think one of the things that I've learned the most is that, a real emphasis on relationships. If you are an employer, you are a manager, you really need to work on the personal piece far more than I think we or I maybe recognized in the past. I think that the pandemic has shown, you can't solve a problem from one dimension, right? All of these problems, they are so vast that they involve looking at it from so many different angles. So yes, we need the technical know-how in order to figure out, vaccines and testing. That's been essential, but that's not nearly enough. I mean, certainly in the United States, we recognize how differential the impact of the pandemic has been. And so if people are not attuned to issues of race and racism and inequality, they're not going to get very far in solving these problems. So I think that one of the things we can take from this pandemic is to emphasize how a liberal arts education actually helps face those challenges. And it may be no accident, I'm sure Wellesley and Flame and Amherst, we have plenty of people at the forefront of fighting the pandemic at the highest levels of government. They're Amherst graduates, they're probably Wellesley graduates, there would be Flame graduates if Flame had been around long enough. But it is striking to me how important the sort of holistic education that we give and how much you can apply that to the pandemic today.
Deepak,
Yes.
continuing this discussion on purpose of education.
Yes.
Even in MBA and executive education, the purpose of education is to provide our students. So let's talk about MBA right now. To provide them, life skills. But rarely do we see, subjects like psychology, like sociology, or essence of anthropology or philosophy, being taught in MBA programs worldwide. On one side, we are talking about, getting our students ready for the future, right? So we are talking about the need to be innovative going forward in this digital era, right? They need to be creative. They need to be critical thinkers. They need to be able to manage adversity. But, those kind of, functional subjects are not included even in the latest curriculum that I've seen in management MBA programs. So what is your take on this?
No, so let me tell you, I like both Andrew and Catherine are on the call. See, when I was the Dean of Kellogg School of Management, I created a new course on Shakespeare for all MBA students. And I tell you, there is a big learning. If you look at it, we selected a set of Shakespeare plays, because what is the purpose of MBA education? When people ask me, Dean Jain, what do you teach in business schools? When you go and study physics, when you go and study engineering, we know there is a set of principles that teaches. What do you teach in management schools? I have a very simple answer. I say what we teach our students is how you put structure on unstructured problems. That means what we like to teach our student is to way to think, way to reason, critical thinking and sound reasoning that leads to better decision making. Now, when you look at a play like Hamlet, or you look at a Shakespeare play like Othello, I'm just giving some examples or so on. Hamlet thinks and thinks but never acts. Othello never thinks but acts. Now, my point is, this historical evolution is a great learning experience. And you won't believe, Financial Times heard about it, and there was a one full-page story about me and Shakespeare and how I really believe that today in business schools, we need to bring courses on anthropology, sociology. Education has to be more holistic. We can learn from history, things that have worked, things that have not worked. Business education should not be just spreadsheet analysis and all about finance and return on investments and it should be return on intellect, not return on investment. But somehow or other, we have made it more, we have given it more a financial color, that you pay so much tuition to do an MBA, and whether you can get back your tuition in 5 years, 7 years. These kind of metrics are very short-term oriented. Long-term is your ability to think, your ability to work with others, people skills, thinking skills, reasoning. These are the things that we need to really promote, and that would not come just from spreadsheet analysis. We need to have a lot of good courses on psychology, history, and I'm just giving you one example of Shakespeare, but there may be other very good such leaders, whether it is Shakespeare or I still think people can talk about Einstein's in the classes, how he thought, what was the process he went through. These things are very important, and today's students are more focused on the package, or what package I would get once I complete my degree. But sometimes I blame that we teachers also need to push the purpose slightly more. We get hung up on whether the students will give me good ratings in the course or not.
Absolutely.
As deans of the schools, we think that the placement rate is going to affect the reputation of the school. So there are metrics that forces us to move in directions other than the purpose. But I just tell you, my personal principle in life has never been driven by these financial metrics. I tell the students, I am here not to teach you something, but to create an interest in that topic and make you think more after you leave the class.
I hope that we have deans of management MBA programs tuned in today, and what we would strongly recommend is to bring in such disciplines in the classroom. I totally agree with you, Deepak.
Yes. No, that's the future of education, at least future of management education. Cross-pollination, cross-disciplines, interdisciplinary nature. Those are the things our students need to, because they would not get exposed to that in the workplace.
Absolutely.
A lot of financial metrics, they would get exposed in the workplace. Let's give them things that they are not going to add. Future of work and future of education need to be coupled together. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Agree with you wholeheartedly. And so my next question, goes to Catherine and Andy. Let's talk about the future, right? So we've addressed, the current issues, what we have done to address the pandemic. What are the future trends you foresee in liberal arts education in the next 5 years? Probably, Andy, you could go first.
Well, again, I'm going to start from the point of view of the adjustments and the changes that we have had to make in the course of the pandemic. I think it's a really interesting question that we all face now to ask how much of the change that we have made since last March is going to be permanent for us, and in what senses are we likely to revert back to the way we were before. And I think it's very hard for us to know as we are right in the middle of it. But I guess I do think that there are some fairly fundamental changes that will come out of this experience. And you could argue that higher education was moving towards these kinds of changes even before the pandemic, but I suspect that the pandemic will have proven in retrospect to have accelerated those developments. So, as both Catherine and I said, we're looking forward to a time when we can go back to the fundamental model of education that we espouse, which is face-to-face and as a community, as a residential community. That being said, I think that the hands-on practical experience that our community has had in the course of these last 10 months with remote technology, synchronous communication and asynchronous. I have a hard time thinking that that's going to disappear from our education after the crisis is over. I don't believe that we at least are going to move towards a fully online program, but I do think that we will be much more hybrid institution in the future, and I think other liberal arts colleges will be too. I think the concept of a course has changed as a result of this experience, and I doubt that we will revert. I think the way in which the pandemic has challenged us to think differently about geography, about where we are in the world physically and how we can relate to other people. I think that will have a permanent impact too. For the first time in our history, we have students who are this spring who are studying abroad in countries outside the United States, and at the same time taking some of their coursework from Wellesley professors taught from this campus. I think that the mixing up of on-campus, off-campus, also the mixing up of more traditional curricula instruction and experiential learning of various kinds, internships, civic engagement, service learning, all those things happening at the same time, facilitated by technology, I think is likely to be an important part of our future. And again, I think we were heading in that direction before the pandemic, but I think because the pandemic has so kind of lowered the psychological hurdle that many of our faculty and students and staff feel about that kind of experience, that those changes will be permanent ones. So I'll stop there. I mean, there are, in every area of the operation of a college, I think there are ways in which we will work differently. Maybe I'll just throw out one other one. We are, just like Catherine's college, constantly trying to recruit to our college talented students who come from less advantaged backgrounds or from areas of the country or of the world where they have not had immediate contact with Wellesley. And we have learned in the pandemic that remote communication really enables us to make contact with populations that we had not been successful in making contact with. And so I think that those changes will be permanent. I think that we will use remote technology to extend our reach into new areas and new populations. I think that's a great thing. I think that points us to a more diverse community, and I hope will be a big part of our future, and think it will.
Thanks, Andy. Catherine, do you would like to add to what Andy said? Do you foresee some other trends and challenges?
So I would echo a lot of what Andy says, although I would put it in sometimes somewhat other language. So I think that in the future, faculty will actually be much more innovative in their teaching and in their pedagogies. I think that they're going to be using a lot of the digital tools that they learned during this period and to good effect. I think that the old lecture, to the extent that we still had that at Amherst, I think that's really going to sort of go goodbye. I think that people will not put their lectures online, but much shorter chunks of content in many much shorter sort of bits, maybe 5 or 10 minute lectures as opposed to the 50-minute lecture. And I think that faculty will use time in class in much more active ways to sort of really interact with students more. So I think that there's a whole strand of pedagogical innovation that will serve our institutions very well. I also agree with Andy that even an event like today's event, we would probably not be doing were it not for the pandemic. I think that we're going to have a lot more virtual Zooming in, if that's the platform that's being used, of really important and influential speakers, but it's much easier to get them to speak for an hour or two if they can do it remotely and come to the college that way, as opposed to actually having to be in person on campus. So I think there'll be a lot more interaction in the virtual world, especially as concerns sort of outside speakers. And I think that will be a real change. I want to emphasize the last point that Andy made about how the pandemic is allowing us to reach additional students and to be more present with students that, in other ways, we might not have been able to reach. And what I would emphasize here is, school after school, including Amherst College, have gone test optional. That is a huge difference. We are no longer going to be relying on standardized tests as a main indicator of whether a student should be admitted to the college or not. That's going to have perhaps a quite profound difference in terms of the students that we bring to the campus. And that will be a very interesting change over the long haul. It's certainly going to impact our admissions policies, and it means that we'll probably have a somewhat different student body, one that's more diverse, one that learns in different kinds of ways. And so those pedagogical innovations will be really important in terms of reaching those new students who we will be able to have at the college. So I think there's some pretty profound impacts that are also coming, at least in the United States, from the real emphasis on race and racism, and to what extent it has shaped our institutions and how we can overcome that. The fact that we sort of had a pandemic, and then at the same time we had this huge, a focus after George Floyd's murder around race and racism and how that has impacted our institutions. I think that's going to have a pretty lasting change at the institutions as well. So, I think the pandemic brought some of that even more to the fore than would have been the case before. So many of these trends were trends that were happening anyhow, but I think that they have been accelerated. And I think it will be a lasting change, and our institutions, they will change more quickly because of the pandemic.
Adding to what you said, Catherine, the entire, shift online and embracing new pedagogy has made the world smaller, but at the same time, it has opened up opportunities. That one opportunity and trend that I envision is the fact that faculty, all across the globe will be teaching at each other's schools now, right? So given if most institutions, continue to go blended, probably 40%, 30% of the curriculum would be taught remotely. And now this opens up the possibility of institutions and universities to sign MOUs whereby faculty from each other's institution can teach and get credits there. Do you see this happening going forward?
It's a really interesting dilemma. Right now, I'm not signing any contracts that would allow faculty to teach remotely if we go back in person. So, our students have made it very clear that they really want to have in-person instruction and not remote instruction. So I think there are limits to what you're suggesting, although it's also possible that costs and expenses will force us in the direction that you're talking about. And similarly to, create a more diverse faculty, we may eventually have to move to allowing people to live remotely. But right now, we're not yet willing to go that step. And, obviously it's fine if a professor is going to a conference and wants to Zoom for, that class day. But
right.
By and large, the expectation, at least at Amherst, at least for next year, is if we're back in person, we are expecting faculty to be in person as well, unless there's some really significant health reasons why that can't be the case. But that's our intention at the moment. But that may change because, again, what we've seen through this pandemic is the need for flexibility. It may be that I hold this line now in January, but in April or May, it'll be a very different story.
Yeah, you never know. You never know.
Could I just add to Catherine? We're in the same place, but one thing that we have found this year is that our instructors have made much more use of guest lecturers and visitors to their classes than they have in normal times, and that those those guest lecturers have really tended to be really appreciated by the students in the classes. I think it's partly that it's asking a lot of students and of faculty to have so many hours of Zoom face-to-face. And having a different voice in the classroom for a day, bringing a different perspective, I think has been perhaps even more valuable in this time than it was in the previous times. And it's interesting to think about whether that might continue, especially as Catherine said, as we have a different kind of pedagogy. That our faculty, I totally agree with what Catherine said, our faculty are learning things about how they can engage students and enhance student learning through mixing things up and blending things. And maybe this is another way in which that will come to pass.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now over to you, Deepak. I recall having a conversation with you a few weeks ago, and we were talking about trends in management education and the future of management education. And you promised me that you'll encapsulate your thoughts in a slide, and you will present your thoughts with our audiences. So can I request you to relay your thoughts on?
Sure. So, couple of observations when I was listening to Catherine and Andrew. I come back to the basic purpose which I articulated. That,
can you get the slide, please, Jasmine?
Can you not hear me?
I can hear you, Deepak. Please go ahead.
Okay. Now, my point is, the first major trend would be, see, there are certain courses students take when they come for a management education. They take a course on financial accounting, they take a course on economics, they take a course on something, I would say, basic statistics. Courses that are already well structured, there is no need to have them in the classroom. We can send them the online modules and let them prepare those things before they come to join the program. Because if the purpose of the classroom is to make you think, when you are teaching a course on calculus, the derivative of x square is going to be 2x. I don't need an opinion from students whether it is 2x or 3x or 2x plus 4. My point is, the future would be more in-depth discussions in the classroom. And so courses which are very standard, let students prepare themselves. They can come for evaluation purpose. We can evaluate their learning, their skills, the tools on a pass-fail basis. And if they don't, if they are not good at that, they can take an extra few hours classes that we would offer in person for them to learn those financial skills, the statistical skills, and so on. The second point I want to make is, I call it the new diet of education, I would say. And I use the word D-I-E-T. D stands for digitally savvy, which means, Andrew, you used the term called this blended learning and so on type of things. Faculty members have to learn the blended skills. You cannot just be teaching with the traditional way. And Catherine, you made a point. I don't see the world being totally online. But I think an efficient use of the tool can make the experience better. So the first D stands for digitally savvy. I stands for interdisciplinary nature. We need to make sure that we create a lot of interdisciplinary nature there. And I don't need to bring the presentation, please. I don't want people to get confused.
Please go ahead, Deepak.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I stands for interdisciplinary focus. The E stands for entrepreneurial spirit. Many students, they today don't want to go and work for a regular corporation or regular job. And this is not only in management schools. I heard from my colleagues who were dean of engineering schools that a lot of people are in this business of new startups. So some focus on entrepreneurship should be there, and how we teach those courses is both an art and a science. And the word T stands for talent. At the end, our basic purpose is we create talent for the world. Our students become a resource for corporations, for governments, for whether it is a small business, large business, or you go and work for a not-for-profit organizations, or you are in the business of enhancing your talent by going for more higher education, whether it is PhD or some form other. So if you look at the future, blended learning is going to be an important part of a pedagogical experience, but it's not going to substitute, or the online learning is not going to substitute the classroom teaching. And what Catherine was saying, that students expect to be in the classroom. They don't want to pay $60,000 per year and have classes online. Dishan, the other point you made, and we are very strict with that at our university, if professors can teach multiple places through online, we would not allow if we find that they teach at other schools. Now, the only people who can teach at other schools are professors who are adjunct professors or some professors of management practice. But if you are enrolled as a full-time professor at University X or School X, no matter how big the world becomes, your loyalty should be to the institution. But you can teach more executive education courses online for corporations. So this is a new trend that I am seeing, like Microsoft came to Kellogg School and said, would you design some marketing skills-based courses that we can expose all students or all participants of Microsoft all over the world? Now, these kind of things are very important, that how we create a lot of online modules of different skills, tools, and concepts. So what COVID or this particular challenge has taught us is business as usual is not going to be the mantra going forward. Professors have to change, universities have to change in terms of their curriculum design, and students also have to accept that digital learning, as I say, the first D for digital learning, I for interdisciplinary focus, and E for entrepreneurial ventures, and T for the talent, we should tell students that we are preparing you for this new world. So getting this mixture of skills would help you long term.
Excellent. There was just basically, a great segue to my next question, which, revolves around curricular changes in the undergrad space in liberal education. So as we think about the challenges of the next 5 to 10 years, I'm pretty sure that, every institution, goes through a regular curriculum review process. So just imagine Wellesley is going through a process right now, and you are, is this a 5-year, annual process? What would be the 3 big changes that you think you would be making to make our students future ready? Andy?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I go back to what Deepak said earlier, which when you were talking about the Shakespeare course that you inaugurated, and also your view that the future of education is interdisciplinary, and that approach to education seems to me the way that certainly our institution is going to be heading in the years ahead. Problem solving
Yes.
of various kinds inherently requires the bringing together of different kinds of deep knowledge and perspective and method. And we want to prepare our students to be, in every sense, in every dimension of their lives, creative problem solvers. And after they leave the college, I really think that an essential part of that needs to be a greater emphasis on interdisciplinarity. A lot of the structure of our institution and many other institutions in the United States, and I would say certainly Western Europe, a lot of the structure comes from 19th or early 20th century academic thinking about different disciplines. And we, I think, are at a point where we need to break down those barriers between those disciplines. So I think one thing, to answer your question, Dishan, it was a very specific question. One thing that we will do, I think, is increasingly to appoint to our faculty people whose expertise straddles different disciplines, or gives them a vantage point where they can teach and do their own work in fields that are multiple. So I think that would be one thing. The second thing that our curriculum, way in which our curriculum will change is, I think, reflecting the changing nature of our student body and our commitment to being a fully inclusive community in which all students have every opportunity to succeed, with a greater emphasis than ever before on equity and social justice, some of the really important themes that Catherine talked about earlier, I think need to be reflected in both in our curriculum and in our pedagogy. So the way that all our faculty teach, and also the content of what we teach. So I think that, like many institutions, we moved away, for example, from the concept of a core curriculum decades ago. I think that we need to think about that concept again, and to think about whether a core curriculum that is based around ideas of justice, how to deal with difference, how to talk across difference, how to be inclusive, that I think will be a focus of our work. So I know you asked me for three. But those seem like two big ones. So I'll stop there with that.
Yes.
Yeah, the constant debate that we have in the Dean's Forum, the Vice-chancellor's Forum here is, how do we, this whole new frenzy with AI, understanding machine learning, augmented reality, VR, the implications of data, right? Having some elements of data science in your curriculum, right? If you do not have the basic understanding of the implications of AI, right, we are not going to be successful in future. I mean, these are common debates that are circling around. So Catherine, over to you. What are your views, and would you be making some curricular changes on this?
So interesting questions, and again, I'm afraid my answers very much mirror Andy's, even though we haven't talked about this in person. So it's kind of fascinating to hear. So Amherst has an open curriculum, which means there are no requirements across the board. The only requirements that students have for graduation is that they have to have taken 31 courses and passed them, and that they have satisfied the requirements of a major. But other than that, there's no distribution, no core curriculum, nothing like that. However, because of all the changes that have occurred, particularly around issues of race and racism, Amherst for the first time is pretty seriously considering how to incorporate those notions into a curriculum that everyone would have to participate in. So that's a big change. I don't think that we're going to see quite the undermining of the open curriculum, but I think that whether it's through perhaps a required course that attends to issues of inequality, justice, racism, however that gets phrased, that might happen, or it may be that each individual major decides that it needs to have a course that is related to its discipline around these issues, I think that that will be one of the changes that we see in the curriculum. It's interesting, Dishan, that you mentioned AI and computer science. For the first time ever, the largest number of students applying to Amherst say that they want to study computer science. Normally it's economics, but now it's actually computer science. I think that the interdisciplinarity that Andy mentioned will be important in the future. In all the job interviews that I do with potential candidates who teach at the college, I ask if you could teach a course with someone not in your department, what kind of a course would it be? What would that course look like? And usually it's interesting, some candidates just can't even begin to fathom that question. It's like, what? I would teach beyond my actual sub-discipline. And so I use that as a sort of useful marker to see how flexible are these individuals and how much are they thinking about sort of a holistic view of looking at problems. The other piece that I would say will be important, and this builds on what Andy was saying around problem solving, is an emphasis on research and student involvement in knowledge production. I think that research, more than anything, prepares students for all the things that we want them to be thinking about in the future. There are no set answers in advance. You have to formulate the questions. The questions aren't spoon-fed to you. You experience mistakes and wrong paths and the wrong way to answer something. And so then you have to start all over again. So sort of the different habits of mind that research instills, I think that we will see more of an emphasis on that. And it's in line with students being more actively engaged in everything that they do, which is, I think, a real emphasis on liberal arts education as we move forward. So very similar answers to what Andy would say. Change will come, and maybe this is the time that Amherst finally overturns its open curriculum. We've had it since 1971. That's a long time, but that now is the kind of epoch where really fundamental changes can take place. And it's interesting that the pandemic has shown us that as well.
And Deepak, in the MBA space, we talked about futuristic skills. I mean, gone are those days where functional expertise are the only ingredients that people look for when they seek employment. Today there has been a shift thanks to the digital revolution that we are in. So in the MBA space, what kind of curricular changes do you anticipate to brace students for the future?
So I want to build on what Andrew and Catherine said. The first is Andrew mentioned about this word called problem solving. To me, as I said, the biggest curriculum change would be that lot of courses that we have, which we had required courses, as you know, which are very skill based. They can be taught digitally or create digital modules. But there are three things that I think should be very important in any curriculum. And that is, one is problem solving. But with that, what I said first, critical thinking, problem solving, and decision making. Because at the end, managers are there to make decisions, whether the decisions turn out to be right or wrong. But how do you create a process where people start with critical thinking, problem solving, and decision making? And we need to create courses that would emphasize these three aspects. The second thing, Dishan, today on the interdisciplinary side, I think we need to bring a lot of sociology, or what I call cross-cultural aspects of human behavior. Because the world, one very big shift that you see in the world is education is becoming more global. Even at undergraduate level, students have all these overseas modules and others. But cross-cultural variations, cross-cultural behavior those needs to bring, and those can be very good discussion oriented courses, because as you know that we in business schools like to bring diversity to the classroom. When I was the dean of INSEAD in Paris, we had a very simple rule: no more than 10% students from one country. Every class I taught at INSEAD was a replica of United Nations. We used to admit 1,000 students on the average from 80 to 85 different countries. So this whole aspect of cross-cultural, sociological aspects ought to be very important part. And the third is what Catherine said, and I think this is more at the undergraduate level that I would say, and you and I have discussed, mostly the top business schools have been driven with MBA programs. I think now we need to emphasize more liberal arts education with business specialization at the undergraduate level. And when you bring those students, best research assistants are undergraduates, more than the MBAs. So this bringing this research culture, and I would use the word more knowledge creation rather than knowledge production. One is knowledge creation, second is knowledge dissemination, and third is knowledge certification. By certification means you give them a degree, but bringing more research to the classroom and making people more think deeply should be the DNA of any program in future, which means the teachers have to change. And because very often we have this inertia that I have been teaching these case studies for years. Somebody just mentioned that they are still teaching cases on companies that are no longer in existence because students, teachers have to prepare for new material. But I really believe the best of education is ahead of us. These kind of pandemic, etc., has told us clearly that change is essential. I say change is inevitable. Worrying is optional, but timely action is essential. So don't worry about it. It's an optional. Change is essential. And the other thing that I am very big believer is the only rigid rule in life one should follow is be flexible. Bringing flexibility in the curriculum to me is something that we need to think about. Now, whether there should be core classes, not core classes, and how we design the curriculum, that I leave it to institutions and individuals what they like to do. But I still believe that there should be some core classes which we think are important skills that everyone needs to have when they go out and work. You are a more expert in this area, like cross-cultural negotiations. In business schools, that skills people need to learn. How do you do negotiations? If you need to have a good curriculum, make sure that the curriculum covers good skills, exposure to good tools, and the state-of-the-art concepts, cutting-edge concepts, and how people integrate these things ought to be something that we should think about. And initially, any professor who teaches a class should give an explanation of the material that he or she is going to cover, so that you set the expectations of students, right? This is why I am adding this course or this particular topic and others. So I really believe that the best is ahead of us. But business as usual, I said, cannot be the norm. Professors ought to change more than the students, because students, though I teach the same course, but I don't teach it to the same students. Students keep changing. They come with a different mindset. Where the change is not happening is at the professor's level. Now, as a dean, you cannot force them to change completely, but we need to work together with them, give them some special assistance with people who can help them bring some new material. And sometimes I have also done one thing. I have sent some professors go and attend some classes at other universities for a semester and see how the other people are teaching courses which have a different pedagogical component and a different cross-cultural component.
You know, I think you said it all right, Deepak. That's exactly what we have done at Flame University in our recent curriculum review. We have identified certain core skills that an undergraduate students need to have.
Yes.
Although we are liberal arts focused, we want to give them as much flexibility as possible. But to make them future ready, there is a requirement for some core courses, and I don't want to elaborate on them here in this forum, but I am also a watchdog on the time clock today right now, and the time clock tells me we just have 3 more minutes, so I'm just going to very quickly go round robin with the 3 of you. One advice for faculty and one advice for students, because especially students, given the pandemic, more than students in India, parents are more worried than students. What's going to happen? What kind of courses do I enroll my students in? What does the future look like? And that is close to paranoia. So what is that one advice you would like to, give parents, student, and faculty? We'll start with Andy.
I kind of wish we'd started this the other way, the other order. Let me say a couple of things, because it's my last chance to say. I want to go back to something Catherine said at the beginning about how this whole experience, in a way, has underscored the value of a liberal arts approach to life. I think that when we went into this crisis, we had no idea how to get through it successfully. And in my entire life and career, I have never known a situation where I felt that I needed other people so much as I needed them to get through this. Right. This was not a moment where it felt right for me to tell other people what to do. It felt like it was a moment for me to ask other people to think about the same problems that I was thinking about, and collectively to come up with a solution. So, I guess I might say to students or parents that this experience that we've been going through, it just underscores why the greatest asset of a liberal arts education is the inherent flexibility it gives, the capacity it gives you to adapt as you go through your life. And Dipak said that was his golden rule, to be flexible. I think that there is no greater lesson of this whole crisis than that is one of the golden rules in life. So that's what I would say. What would I say to faculty? I think that this has been very hard for faculty, really hard. One of the things we talk a lot about is how this has collapsed the distinction between faculty members' home lives and their work lives. And for some of them, that is a very difficult situation. I'm not sure I would have advice to faculty, except that I'm grateful to them for all that they've done, and not just at Wellesley, but across every institution that I'm aware of. I'm grateful for what they've done, and I hope that maybe they have discovered through the experience ideas that they will want, without my prompting them, without a dean telling them what to do, discovered ideas that they want to take forward in the next stage of their lives.
No, I hear you. I'm extremely grateful to my, especially senior faculty, you would tell me before the pandemic that I am never going to learn technology. I know I'm not even going to learn how to, get a cab via, Uber on my machine here, on my phones. And I've seen them, going through tutorials, bracing up for the challenge. And, we talk about teaching ratings. These are the faculty who have shown massive teaching, one of the best teaching ratings at Flame University. So, I echo what you just said. I remain extremely grateful to all my faculty as well for bracing up to this challenge and giving their best, and not, impeding student experience, even after we've, moved to online, pedagogy. Catherine, what about you?
Just to be very quick, I would tell students to stick with it, even though it's hard, stick with it and it will pay off in the end. Even, don't take endless amounts of time off hoping that, college will get back to normal. Stick with it. And to faculty, just echoing Andy and Dishan, it's thank you and thank you again and thank you again. So thank you. That's sort of what I would say.
Perfect. And Deepak, closing words?
So I would have one common message, and that is, see, when you come to study, we always emphasize academic excellence. Then many people like to, the concepts that you bring in academic excellence, you try to show the relevance of those concepts. So what is academic and business relevance? But I really want the third part, which is social significance. I want both students and faculty to think about what we do for the greater good. It should not be the classroom. It's not just the corporations, what we do for the communities, what we do for the societies. And that's why when I was the Dean of Kellogg School and we all think of branding, the brand for Kellogg School I created was, by joining the Kellogg School, you start your journey from success to significance. Be successful and don't think of giving back when you retire, because the day you retire, from who's who, you become who's he. So while you are on the successful platform, try to think about the society. I think as human citizens, we need to think of world peace, prosperity, and a feeling of giving back. I tell this to the faculty. I thank them, of course, what they do. But in your case discussions, do bring the social significance part. And for students also, I tell them, think about what you can give to others. We all are blessed. But I think the way we can make the world a better place is if we also think what we can do for others.
And that closure, blends very well with our theme, right? Which is on purpose.
Yes, the purpose, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Purpose, passion, and then performance.
Well said, Deepak. And I am mindful of time. We are running, 3 minutes late now. So I'm just going to close this discussion. And before I close this discussion, I think, blended is here to stay. But how much of blended will institutes embrace is very much a function of, the programs they are in. Whether you are in an undergrad program, you're in liberal arts, you're in engineering, you're in sciences, or you're in MBA or executive education as well. But the level of, how much of technology you embrace will all depend. I do not see too much of blended learning in the undergrad space, probably more disruption in the executive education space and probably the MBA. We did not get a chance to talk about affordability and accessibility of education, which is a very important point. But I think the future is in government and institutions to come together to make education more accessible to all and affordable as well. So hopefully we'll meet each other in another forum where we can take this very important point forward. But once again, thank you very much from the bottommost of my heart. On behalf of the entire Flame fraternity, I thank you, Andy, Catherine, and Deepak, for taking out time from your very busy schedule to be here with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for including us.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.